Hi everyone, we're here with another video talking about the excretory system. And the excretory system, one of the major components of it is the urinary system. So we're going to talk about the essentials of the excretory/urinary system. Okay, as human beings, we eat food to actually get nutrients and to get energy. And our cells go through metabolic processes. Now, these processes, whether you eat or just normal metabolism, your body produces toxic waste buildup. And toxic waste is not good. If you ever seen this symbol anywhere, you would stay away from it. So your body has to have ways of eliminating it. But before we talk about the elimination, we have to talk about what are some of these toxic waste buildup that is produced. Now, living vertebrates like us, we produce nitrogenous waste. So they're nitrogen-based waste, and the ones that we most commonly produce are urea and uric acid, and some other vertebrates produce ammonia. Now, if you drink ammonia, that would actually kill you, okay, because that is very toxic. Urea, if it builds up in high concentration, can also have a negative impact as well as uric acid. So the kidneys play a huge role in actually eliminating some of these wastes before they build up. Now, there are some conditions that can result as accumulation of some of these toxic waste buildup. So example, uric acid, some individuals have issues clearing uric acid, and it can actually get deposited in certain parts of the body, causing swelling and pain. An example of that is gout. So gout is an accumulation of uric acid. So typically individuals that have this condition have to go on special diets to kind of reduce the amount of uric acid that is produced in their body. Okay, so let's talk about the major system that is involved in removing waste products, and it also does other things as well, which I'll talk about later. But the urinary system is very important at eliminating the waste. So this is showing you basically the urinary system in a female and male. There are similarities and differences. So the similarities obviously are the kidneys. The kidneys are found in the back of the posterior region between the vertebral column. And then when urine is produced or the waste products are taken out of the system, they then follow the ureter. You see the ureter, both male and female have ureters. That will bring that urine production down to the bladder. So both male and females have bladders. Now, the difference comes in when the urine actually is released from the body. They're both released from urethra, but as you can see here, the female urethra is a lot shorter than the male urethra. Now, because of this, we do see females having a higher incidence of urinary tract infections compared to males, even though males can get them too. So females are more prone to urinary tract infection or UTIs than males because of the length of the urethra. Now, one thing to note, a lot of students mix up ureter and urethra. Ureter brings the urine from the kidneys down to the bladder, where the urethra eliminates it from the bladder outside.
So, Dr. V,
yes,
why would length of the urethra increase the susceptibility for UTIs in females?
Well, since the urethra is a lot shorter, the bacteria that generally causes it can attach and spread a lot faster in the urethra and can move up quite, more at a rapid pace. And one thing to note as well, not only female, but also toddlers are at a more higher risk because they don't tend to wipe the proper way when they go to the bathroom. So female toddlers are even more at risk than an actual adult female.
Oh, so hygiene plays a role as well.
Big role. Good question. Okay, this slide I'm just showing you just the basic anatomy of the kidneys. As I said, the kidneys are located towards the back. This is showing you a front view, but it's actually towards the back. We have two of them that's lying right next to the vertebral column. If you cut it open, you see the most outer part on the outside has a capsule that's a fibrous capsule. Outside the fibrous capsule, as we're going deeper, we have the renal cortex. Going deep to the renal cortex, in this region, we have the renal medulla. And we have the renal papillae. And within this renal medulla region, we have what's known as renal pyramids. The renal pyramids actually holds very important structures that we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, we do have the renal pelvis. I do want to note that this is where all the urine that's produced, all the waste products that are to be released from the collection ducts actually enters through the renal pelvis and go down the ureter, and we know that the ureter takes the urine to the bladder. So this is just showing you the general overview or structure of the kidney. Okay, so I know this picture kind of look a little gross because this is an actual kidney that's dissected open, and she's not wearing gloves, but that's besides the point. What I'm trying to talk about in this slide is to talk about what is actually the function of the kidney, because I know I mentioned elimination of waste. That is only one of the functions of the kidney. It also plays an important role in maintaining water balance. When we spoke about that negative feedback in homeostasis, kidney plays a critical role in that. It clears certain compounds out of the blood, like if you're taking antibiotics or maybe some medications. If you are, let's say, a diabetic, if you have too much glucose in the bloodstream, the kidneys will try to, regulate the blood sugar by dumping some more glucose into the urine to try to normalize, also part of negative feedback. It's involved in blood pressure regulation, and we'll talk about all these later. And also balancing pH, and it works along with a system in the blood as well as the lungs, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Okay, so what is the actual functioning unit of the kidney? The kidney itself has smaller components that are very critical. So if we take a look here, we have our kidney showing you a cross-section, and here's the renal pyramids that I was talking about. And I said the renal pyramid actually houses important structures as needed. And just as a reminder, this is showing you the outer part of the cortex that's right underneath the capsule, and then we have the medulla, and we have these structures that are extending. So just take a look. We'll talk more about this later, but this is the actual functioning unit of the kidneys that's found within the renal pyramid called the nephron. I know this looks like chaos, but it really isn't. We're going to try to break this down for you to understand how the waste from the blood will actually go through these nephrons and how all the waste and all the excess things get taken out of the system and eliminated through urine by going through the collecting duct. So we will talk about that in a second. Okay, so now let's take a deeper look at the nephron. Remember, that is the functioning unit of the kidneys. And to start off, I just want to give you a big overview looking over here on this side before I actually talk about the nephron, is that the function of the nephron occurs in segments, right? So the first part of it is filtration, and the filtration takes place in the renal corpuscle. There are structures associated with the renal corpuscle. Then the next segment is reabsorption/secretion. Now this is vital. This is things that your body needs to ensure that they're holding on to will then get reabsorbed in that region. This occurs in the proximal convoluted tubule, which we'll talk about in a second. Then we have the loop of Henle or the loop of nephron. They're actually given two names. What happens in this segment is solute concentration. We'll explain that. And there are two limbs to this loop, the descending and ascending. And then we have the reabsorption segment, reabsorption/secretion segment, that's found happening in the distal convoluted tubule. and then the collection duct. But this is not the vital that we saw here. There are variations that can occur of what actually happens here. So this is just the overview of what's happening in a nephron at different segments. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And I'm going to turn to Dr. V, the other Dr. V, to kind of explain a little bit what's happening here.
Okay, let's start with the glomerulus. We're going to go to a bigger picture just to describe how important this structure is in terms of the nephron functionality. If we look here, the ability of the glomerular capsule to filter depends on blood flow coming in, and that's accomplished by the afferent arteriole. So blood comes in and then goes for filtration. Blood also leaves, and so the blood that has now been filtered can get back into blood circulation through the efferent arteriole. The important factor here is that the kidney is a real-time adjusting organ. So it's not just a one-trick pony. It just doesn't filter and that's it. If you look at the different stages, number one is filtration. So blood flow comes in, it's filtered, and then it travels down the different parts of the nephron to then create what's called tubular fluid. Tubular fluid eventually will become urine. Number two is reabsorption. So let's say the kidney filtered something out of the blood, but there's some situation that requires that filtered material to be re-entering the circulation. Just because it was filtered doesn't mean that's it. Remember, it's tubular fluid and not quite urine just yet. So things can be reabsorbed at the peritubular capillaries even if they were filtered. Certain ions can be reabsorbed, water, and things of that nature. The number three is secretion. What does that mean? Sometimes that's a little confusing. So notice secretion is not happening at the glomerulus. Secretion occurs when there are things in the blood that were not filtered but may need to be eliminated. So you can still secrete substances from the peritubular capillaries into the tubular fluid. Same thing, ions and certain substances can be eliminated even if it wasn't filtered originally. Why would you want to do this? Well, the body is dynamic. Let's say you all of a sudden had a blood pressure problem and you need to now get rid of fluid buildup. You would then be able to get rid of substances or solutes such as sodium to cause the body to get rid of fluids. We can talk about that a little later. And then number four, tubular fluid, once it goes down the collecting duct, will eventually become urine. Once it's in the urine, there's no return. It's going to be eliminated.
Okay, so excretion is basically when you have your filtration, some things will get reabsorbed, some other things may leave the system that missed the initial filtration in the glomerulus, and then it will continue to travel down to either reabsorb back water or to eliminate waste, correct?
Right.
Okay.
So we've gone back to this basic structure of the nephron, and we've talked about how filtration occurs, how secretion can occur, reabsorption, and elimination. But let's look at the different structures that go in between those processes. So we have the glomerular capsule, and right below that is the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, Dr. V also talked about the structures, but now you can see how they relate to one another. Here we have the descending loop of Henle that originates at the bottom of the proximal tubule, and then the ascending loop of Henle goes up into the distal convoluted tubule, and then the collecting duct begins at that portion of the nephron. Now it's at this portion where, after the convoluted tubule connects with the collecting duct, you then have the formation of urine occurring.
Okay, and just to note, you see here that we have two nephrons that are functioning, and they do the same thing because they are nephrons. Now, it's important for you, I'm sure that if you're taking a course like anatomy, physiology, biology, life science, if you're in med-phys, any of these classes, your instructor is going to require you to know the order of filtration, okay? Now, to note, the glomerular and the Bowman capsule, they're known as the same thing, houses the glomerulus, okay? And, collectively, we'll say that filtration unit is the renal corpuscle. Now, I kind of came up with something to kind of help you remember the order of urine production in the nephron. Hopefully, it'll help you. All right, so this is what I came up with that I find really helps my students. So here we have the renal corpuscle where you have filtration taking place, okay? Remember that region contains that Bowman's capsule, or that glomerular capsule, and the glomerulus. So renal corpuscle, I like to say, okay, real, okay? So real people like dark chocolate. All right, real stands for renal corpuscle. What happens after that filtration step occurring at the renal corpuscle? Well, the proximal convoluted tubule gets that material next for that reabsorption secretion. All right, so that's where the people comes from for proximal. Then we have loop of Henle. We have the descending, remember the part that goes down, and we have descending, the part that goes up, where you can have solution starting to concentrate. So that L stands for like. Okay. Then we have our distal convoluted tubule, where you have some reabsorption, some things may be secreted, so there's several things going on at this stage. So the distal convoluted tubule, D for dark, and then we have collecting duct, and this is where what is going to be urine is actually going to go through the collecting duct to be released from the body. So C, collecting for chocolate. So real people like dark chocolate. Renal corpuscle, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct. So if you kind of remember this mnemonic right here, you can kind of remember the order of filtration, and hopefully it can help you remember it when you see it on exams. Okay, so here's a question. We talk about the function of the kidney. We talk about how it plays a role in homeostasis. So let's actually talk about a situation where homeostasis is mandatory. So what happens to you when you're dehydrated? Sometimes you're dehydrated and not thirsty. But I saw this picture of water, and even though I wasn't thirsty, it was making me thirsty. But I just want you to wonder what happens to you when you're dehydrated. Do you ever notice that your urine around that time may be a little bit darker, or you may not produce as much urine? Well, let's talk about what actually happens that allows this to occur. All right, so before I move to the next slide, I just wanted to ask Dr. V, the other Dr. V, why is dehydration so bad? What does it do?
Well, if you consider that your blood is mainly water, your blood plasma, not the cellular component, but the fluid component, is made up of a large quantity of water. You being dehydrated limits your blood volume. And if your blood volume is decreased, so is your blood pressure. Now, why is that bad? Well, your blood pressure ensures that blood can flow properly to each organ. And if you don't have good flow, then you have things being compromised. One organ that cannot have compromised blood flow because it needs a constant flow of oxygen and nutrients is the brain. If you are dehydrated, the brain is going to not have enough blood flow, therefore not enough nutrients and oxygen, which will lead to all sorts of issues.
Okay, very interesting. And we know the brain is a part of the nervous system, which is a master regulator of the rest of the body. So if you disrupt brain function, that is not a good situation for the other organ systems of your body. Very good point. Okay, so let's talk about how your body will ensure that you stay hydrated, or at least not dehydrate more.
So we've talked about the importance of being hydrated. Now, how does that work in real life? Do most of us get enough water? What is the recommendation? Is that something that is a well-known thing? Well, it's recommended that we all get at least 8 to 10 8-ounce glasses of water per day. I don't know about you, but there's times where I don't get that. It's hard to drink water for me personally and easier for others. So with that variation from person to person, how will the body ensure that even if you don't drink enough water or have enough hydration, that functionality of your organ systems is not compromised?
Yeah, that's actually very important because, I'm also guilty. I find some days I'm really short. So let's talk about some of the key hormones that are involved in this water balance that's related to your kidneys. So I'm just going to zoom up here really quickly. These are what you're going to hear when we have our discussions. So we have our angiotensin, which is produced by the liver. The angiotensin works along in a system with aldosterone. All right, aldosterone is secreted by the adrenal glands. You remember adrenal glands are sitting on top of the kidneys, and they play other functions as well. But remember, angiotensin, aldosterone are in a system along with a third key player, which is renin. All right, so renin is produced in the kidneys. And together, angiotensin, aldosterone, and renin will play a role in preventing dehydration, which we'll talk about later. Then we have the antidiuretic hormone, which is produced by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a very critical region of the brain. It's really tiny, but for its size, it really does a lot. So it makes the antidiuretic hormone that is stored by the posterior pituitary. Now it's interesting because the hypothalamus and the pituitary glands are both masters of the endocrine system. If you hadn't seen our video on the endocrine system, it's probably a good idea for you to go and look at it so you can better understand what I'm talking about when I referred to two masters. All right, so this too also plays a role in help maintaining water balance, especially when you're slightly dehydrated or dehydrated. Now this one, atrial natriuretic peptide, we'll talk about that later. It does not function as how these function, but it can regulate the other systems if needed, if blood volume goes the other way, if it goes too high. So angiotensin, aldosterone, renin, and ADH play a role in dehydration to prevent dehydration, whereas the atrial natriuretic peptide goes the other way. We'll discuss that a little bit later.
Okay, so a general overview of this system is that first you get angiotensin from the liver, and the kidneys produce the renin, which in combination, they interact with one another, combine to form angiotensin 1. Now, angiotensin 1 can help trigger downstream hormones to be released. But in order to go from angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2, you need something called ACE, and that stands for angiotensin converting enzyme produced by the lungs. So once you get ACE and angiotensin 1, you then get angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 then can trigger aldosterone and antidiuretic hormone, like Dr. V said.
Okay, great. So now we're going to go a little bit further into the function of the urinary system in water balance. Okay, so let's start off talking about the antidiuretic hormone. Remember that hormone is actually produced by the hypothalamus, but is secreted by the posterior pituitary. Now, it responds to dehydration, and I'm going to turn to Dr. V to explain how this antidiuretic hormone actually works in response to low blood volume or dehydration.
Okay, so in this diagram, you see there's two other pictures. You have a picture of a kidney, and you have a picture of blood vessels. Antidiuretic hormone actually has another name. It's also known by the name vasopressin, and that's where the blood vessels come in, because if you have low blood volume and dehydrated, you also have low blood pressure. Remember what we discussed earlier. If you have low blood pressure, that's not good. And so antidiuretic hormone, or known by the other name, vasopressin, can constrict blood vessels so that blood pressure can be elevated slightly to maintain homeostasis. Now, the other thing that antidiuretic hormone does is it causes reabsorption of water, specifically at the collecting duct, by increasing what's called aquaporins. These are pores that water can pass through. And so the body can reabsorb that water through increasing aquaporins in the nephron.
Very interesting. So these negative feedback loops are critical at keeping you alive. So just to recap, if your blood volume is low or you're dehydrated, in order to increase the blood pressure, because if you're dehydrated, your blood pressure will decrease. But in response to negative feedback, the vasopressin or the antidiuretic hormone will come in and constrict the blood vessels, narrowing it a little bit to increase that pressure, while working on the kidneys to actually allow more reabsorption of water. So this is why if you're dehydrated, some individuals may see a spike at some point in the blood pressure because of the vasoconstriction. And also you will see a more concentrated urine because more water is actually going back, reabsorbing back into the system. So your urine will appear dark. Now, if your urine is dark, just know that your antidiuretic hormone is one of the hormones that are working in your favor.
If you also consider this, let's look at another clinical point here. If you have too much fluid, which means you have high blood pressure, high blood volume, doctors will give you what's called a diuretic. And diuretic medications have the opposite effect of antidiuretic hormone. So instead of reabsorbing water, a diuretic will cause the kidney to excrete more water, therefore getting rid of, sometimes the condition is called edema or extra fluid buildup or swelling, but also to decrease blood pressure by getting rid of that extra blood volume.
Great, thank you. All right, so we know all about the antidiuretic hormone, also known as vasopressin. But now we want to talk about that system that I was talking about, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. This is a very important system, and it increases water absorption by the kidneys, and it's an actual very interesting phenomena that occurs for this to happen. And I'm going to turn to Dr. V to explain a little bit further. He did talk about this a little bit, but he's going to explain a little bit further what is going on here.
Okay, so as a recap, we said that the liver produces angiotensin. Then we have renin produced by the kidney. Renin and angiotensin create angiotensin 1. You then have angiotensin converting enzyme produced by the lungs, and then converting angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. This stimulates aldosterone, an antidiuretic hormone. Now, how does aldosterone, which is produced by the adrenal gland, specifically the adrenal cortex, how does that help increase water volume. We know that if you look at the nephron, sodium is a key player, and actually aldosterone causes the body to reabsorb sodium. The thing about sodium is that in general, water follows sodium. So if you excrete sodium, you're going to lose water. If you reabsorb sodium, you're going to get more water being absorbed into the blood. So aldosterone has that key functionality to cause reabsorption of sodium. Therefore, it helps the body reabsorb water.
Okay, so in the case of someone's dehydrating, they want to hold on to more water. So the best way is that aldosterone will kind of trigger a response in the kidneys where sodium will get reabsorbed back, and as you said, that water follows sodium, water will also get reabsorbed back. And so if that happens, that means that more water is going back into your system to prevent the dehydration process. And you can see here once again the antidiuretic hormone working along with the aquaporins to ensure that the water is coming back into your system. Okay, so the two systems that we spoke about was the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, and the other hormone that was important is the antidiuretic hormone. So if you dehydrate or if you see your urine is dark, these are the hormones that are responsible for what is happening. All right, so let's talk about what happens if your blood volume goes the other way. Let's say you drank a gallon of water in 30 minutes. That is a lot of water to drink in 30 minutes. That is going to cause a spike in blood volume. And when that happens, your heart starts to become a little stressed. Then we are talking about now an important peptide, sometimes you may see it as hormone, called the atrial natriuretic peptide or the atrial natriuretic hormone. And so I'm going to turn to Dr. V for him to kind of explain a little bit how atrial natriuretic peptide responds to high blood volume or high blood pressure.
So if you have a rapidly increasing amount of volume in your bloodstream, this will put a lot of strain on your heart, like Dr. V said. Your heart has a way of detecting this increase. So it stretches the atrial chambers of the heart, which then will stimulate the atrial natriuretic peptide to be released. This peptide causes water elimination. All right, so instead of reabsorbing water, it causes the kidneys to get rid of water. So it's secreted by the heart, and it inhibits the whole renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system so that there is no water reabsorption. In fact, the opposite is true, right? So you get rid of water.
All right, so that's why if you drink a whole bunch of water in a short period of time and you go to the bathroom shortly after, your urine's going to be really clear or really light. And that's because you have more water that's being released due to the atrial natriuretic peptide that is being secreted from the heart.
So clinically, if we look at atrial natriuretic peptide, it's actually an indicator to doctors that someone is going through congestive heart failure. So this is a literal test that they'll order, and if the atrial natriuretic peptide levels are elevated, they'll know that that person's heart is strained. And if you have too much strain for too long of a period on the heart, you will be at higher risk for having a heart attack. And so this is an indicator that this person has congestive heart failure and they're at risk for having a heart attack.
Very interesting. Okay, so there are diseases that can impact kidney function. There are disorders that can cause the kidneys to not function correctly as well. Okay, so sometimes kidneys can lose function due to various reasons. It could be a pre-existing condition that can affect the kidneys, like diabetes, and blood pressure can also affect it, as well as a disruption in kidney function can also impact blood pressure, because remember, the hormone system is important. So just remember that there are disorders of the kidneys that can really have a systemic impact on the body.
So like Dr. V said, hypertension, really high elevated levels of blood pressure for extended periods of time really take a toll on the kidney function. And so the kidney, because it's such a great organ where it can adapt, it can balance blood pressure issues by getting rid of blood volume or getting rid of water or reabsorbing it, depending on if it's high or low blood pressure. But if this happens too often, it can really take a toll on the kidney over time.
Yeah. Thank you. So if something doesn't work right in the kidneys, let's say the kidneys has completely failed, some individuals will have to undergo dialysis. And the reason why they have to undergo dialysis is to kind of, try to make up for the elimination of waste that the kidneys normally do. So you can see here that this is a dialysis procedure, and is to get rid of the urea and other waste that may be accumulating in the blood. Okay, so now it's that time, quiz time. Let's see how much you understood from our review. All right, the purpose of the excretory or the urinary system is to, please select all that applies, eliminate nitrogen or nitrogenous waste from the blood, clear certain compounds from the blood like antibiotics, water regulation, helps to break down food, or plays a role in homeostasis in the body. Hopefully what you selected were all except D, right? So these are all the purpose and function of the urinary system. D has nothing to do with it. Break down food, that is the digestive system. That is a video that will be coming up very shortly. All right, who are more prone to urinary tract infections? Male, female, or they're both equal? Well, hopefully you remember I spoke about females being more prone because they have shorter urethras. All right, which of the following is an example of nitrogenous waste? We have carbohydrates, urea, uric acid, ammonia, more than one of the above. Well, hopefully you would have picked more than one of the above, because urea, uric acid, and ammonia are all nitrogenous wastes that are produced in our body. It could be produced by ingestion of food, like high levels of proteins will cause that, or even metabolic things that go on in our system. Which structure allows urine to pass from the kidney to the bladder? So we have renal pyramids, urethra, renal cortex, ureter, or nephrons. Well, hopefully you picked ureter. All right, don't mix it up with urethra. That's ureter. Which structure allows urine to pass from the bladder to the outside? So we have our same choices: renal pyramid, urethra, renal cortex, ureter, or nephrons. It's urethra. Urethra. What structure is considered the functional unit of the kidneys? Is it the renal pelvis, fibrous capsule, nephron, hilum, or none of the above? Now, I hope you got this one because we spoke about it a lot. And that is the nephron. The nephron is the functional unit of the kidneys. What occurs in the renal corpuscle? Okay, so we have concentration, filtration, vital reabsorption and secretion, variable or optional reabsorption and secretion, or none of the above. So hopefully you remember the segments that we were talking about, because one of the segments we had filtration. And if you remember, renal corpuscle is involved with the segment of filtration, then you got the answer correct. Remember, that's the part that encompasses the glomerular capsule as well as the glomerulus, where things get filtered. What occurs in the loop of Henle? Same choices. All right, so obviously you know it's not going to be filtration. It is concentration. Remember, there are two loops to the loop of Henle. We have descending and ascending loops. What hormone or hormones is or are secreted in response to low blood volume or dehydration? So we have antidiuretic hormone, atrial natriuretic peptide or hormone, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, or all of the above. So we're asking about low blood volume. Your answer should be antidiuretic hormone and the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system. You remember they're very important. If your blood volume drops or you're dehydrated, they kick in to ensure your body reabsorbs water. What is the order of flow in the nephron? Let's see if you can recall it from memory. Right, so hopefully you remember it. I gave you an acronym, and the acronym was Real People Like Dark Chocolate. Okay, so let's see if you remember what it stood for. Renal corpuscle, proximal convoluted tubule, loop of Henle, distal convoluted tubule, and collecting duct. Real people like dark chocolate. All right, so hopefully you found this video helpful and you got 100% on the quiz. I know renal physiology, or just the urinary system in general, since it plays such a critical role in homeostasis, can be quite complex and may require some more studying. If you did not get all of the concepts that were taught, please go back and watch the video again. And please comment below and let me know what you learned from the video or if you did well on the quiz. I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much.